the greatest moments in the greatest tournament. There is something specific about a World Cup moment, something that separates it from any other moment the sport produces. A goal in a domestic league, however beautiful, exists inside the long flow of a season. A Champions League winner, however dramatic, comes at the end of a competition that started in August. The moments of club football, however brilliant, are part of a continuous rhythm. The World Cup moments are different because they happen inside a frame that exists only every 4 years. They happen in front of audiences that exceed anything else the sport will produce. They happen at the moments when entire nations, millions of people, sometimes hundreds of millions, are watching the same thing at the same time, with the kind of compressed collective attention that no other event on the planet can generate. A World Cup moment is not just a moment. It is a moment that the whole world sees. It is a moment that gets remembered, that gets shared, that gets carried by the people who witnessed it for decades. That becomes part of the way an entire generation understands the sport, and sometimes part of the way they understand themselves. The man who scored the goal goes home a national hero forever. The goalkeeper who let it in carries it for the rest of his life. The supporters who watched it tell their children about it, and their children's children about it. And the story passes down through generations as one of the markers of a particular era of football, of life, of being alive at a particular time in the world. Tonight, we tell 50 of those moments, 50 of the most enduring instants the World Cup has produced across nearly a century of tournaments. From the very first goal scored at the inaugural competition in Uruguay in 1930, all the way through to Lionel Messi lifting the trophy in Qatar in 2022. The greatest moments in the greatest tournament. This is the 4th episode in our series on the World Cup. The first 3 told the complete stories of 3 champions: Argentina in 2022, Spain in 2010, Brazil in 2002. Each of those was a single, sustained narrative about a single tournament and a single team. Tonight is different. Tonight is a gallery rather than a story. 50 moments, each a small story of its own drawn from the full sweep of the tournament's history. Some are familiar. Moments that anyone who has watched the World Cup for any length of time will recognize immediately. Others are smaller, less remembered, but worth remembering nonetheless. They are not arranged in order of importance. They are arranged broadly by era, beginning with the foundational moments of the tournament's earliest decades, moving through the Pelé era and the total football era, and the Maradona tournament, into the modern classics of the 1990s and 2000s, and finally into the most recent era that ends with Messi in Qatar. You do not need to remember any of them. You do not need to keep track of where we are. The structure is loose enough that you can drift in and out, fall asleep at any point. Return to the video another night and pick up wherever you happen to find yourself. Each moment is its own small piece. Each chapter is a gathering of related pieces. The whole forms something larger than any single moment can be. This is the World Cup, told through 50 of its most enduring images. Some of what follows is joyful. The goals of pure attacking brilliance. The celebrations that became as iconic as the goals themselves. The moments when teams that nobody had given a chance produced football that the entire world remembered. Some of what follows is sad. The misses. The defeats. The faces of players who had been so close and had not quite been close enough. The image of Roberto Baggio standing in the California sunshine after his penalty had cleared the bar in the 1994 final. An image that in its own way is as significant in the tournament's mythology as any goal ever scored. Some of what follows is strange. The shocks, the upsets, the matches that no model could have predicted and no narrative could have prepared for. North Korea beating Italy in 1966. Senegal beating France in 2002. Saudi Arabia beating Argentina in 2022. The moments when the form book was set on fire and the entire football world had to reconsider what it had thought possible. And some of what follows is simply human. Players being asked to perform under the highest possible pressure and either rising to it or breaking under it. Coaches making decisions that would define their careers in single instants. Supporters watching the things they had been waiting for unfold in front of them. Or not unfold. Or unfold in ways that nobody had imagined. This is what the World Cup is. Not just a tournament, not just a series of football matches, a storehouse of moments that the watching world has decided are worth keeping, that get pulled out and looked at again every 4 years and added to and refined and passed down. 50 of those moments settle in. We begin where the World Cup begins, in the early years, with the foundational moments that gave the tournament its identity and that set the standard for everything that would follow. Chapter 1. The Foundational Moments. The first World Cup was held in 1930, in Uruguay, with 13 nations, in a tournament that almost did not happen, that most of Europe declined to attend, that nearly collapsed under the weight of the travel demands and the financial uncertainty and the basic absurdity of trying to organize a global football championship in a small South American country with limited infrastructure. It happened anyway. And what followed, across the decades that followed, was the slow construction of the tournament's identity. The accumulation of the moments that would, in retrospect, become the foundation of everything the World Cup eventually became. 5 of those moments, the ones that started it all. 1. The first goal. Lucien Laurent, France versus Mexico, July 13th, 1930. The first goal in the history of the World Cup was scored at 3:19 in the afternoon on the 13th of July 1930, in Montevideo, Uruguay, by a Frenchman called Lucien Laurent. The story of the goal is one of complete ordinariness in a moment of completely extraordinary historical significance. France were playing Mexico in the opening match of Group A. The crowd was small, perhaps a few thousand people. The Estadio Pochitos, where the match was held, was a modest stadium that had been built primarily for club football. The conditions were difficult. It was winter in the southern hemisphere. The pitch was damp. The temperature was low. In the 19th minute, a French move worked its way up the left side of the pitch. A pass came to Lucien Laurent, who was running into the penalty area. He met the ball with his right foot, struck it cleanly past the Mexican goalkeeper, and watched it cross the line. He celebrated by the accounts that have survived, in a way that was entirely commensurate with the moment as it felt at the time, which is to say, not very much. He shook a few hands. He jogged back to the center circle. The match continued. There was no recognition at the time that what had just happened was historic. There was no awareness that this goal would become the answer to a trivia question that would be asked for the next century. Laurent himself, in interviews given decades later, recalled the moment with the modest bemusement of a man who had been present at a historical event without realizing it. France went on to win the match 4-1. they were eliminated in the group stage of the tournament. Laurent went home to France and continued his career as a respected but not exceptional professional footballer. He died in 2005 at the age of 97. The goal he scored that afternoon in Montevideo remains the first goal in the history of the World Cup. The moment it crossed the line, the World Cup had its first scorer. The rest followed. 2. Uruguay lifting the first World Cup. July 30th, 1930. The 30th of July 1930. The Estadio Centenario, Montevideo. The final of the first World Cup. Uruguay against Argentina, the neighbours, the rivals. The two best teams in the tournament, in the best possible final the inaugural competition could have produced. The match itself was extraordinary. Argentina led 2-1 at half-time. Uruguay came back in the second half, 3 goals in roughly 30 minutes, to win 4-2. The crowd in the Centenario, a stadium that had been built specifically for this tournament, and that was filled with Uruguayan supporters, witnessed something that very few people in human history had ever witnessed. The first ever World Cup champions. The trophy was presented by Jules Rimet himself, the president of FIFA, the man whose vision had created the entire tournament, the man whose name the trophy itself would eventually carry. Uruguay's captain, José Nasazzi, lifted it above his head. The supporters in the stadium and across the country erupted in the kind of celebration that only the first time of anything can produce. The next day was declared a national holiday across Uruguay. In Argentina, the Uruguayan consulate in Buenos Aires was stoned by furious supporters who believed the match had been unfairly officiated. The rivalry between the two nations, which had existed for decades, was elevated by the match into something more permanent. The Uruguay-Argentina football relationship would, in the century that followed, become one of the most intense in the sport. But the moment that mattered was Nasazzi lifting the trophy. The first time anyone had ever done it. The image, black and white photographs of the captain raising the small gold figure above his head, surrounded by teammates and Uruguayan officials, became one of the foundational images of international football. The starting point of everything that followed. The first World Cup had its champion. The tradition had begun. 3. The Maracanazo, Uruguay 2, Brazil. 3. The Maracanazo, Uruguay 2, Brazil 1, June 16th, 1950. 20 years after Uruguay won the first World Cup, they won it again, under circumstances that, in the long history of the tournament, may still represent the single most shocking result it has ever produced. The 1950 World Cup was held in Brazil, the first since the Second World War, the 1942 and 1946 tournaments having been cancelled due to the conflict. The Brazilian organisers had built, specifically for the tournament, a stadium that was at the time the largest in the world, the Estadio do Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro. Capacity 200,000 people. A monument to Brazilian footballing ambition and to the country's belief that the 1950 tournament was the one they were going to win. The final stage of the tournament, unlike modern World Cups, was a round-robin group rather than a knockout. The decisive match was between Brazil and Uruguay. Brazil only needed a draw to win the trophy. They were the form team of the tournament. They had scored 7 against Sweden, 6 against Spain, in the matches leading up to this one. The atmosphere in the country in the days before the match was not one of nervous hope. It was one of confident expectation. The match was played on the 16th of July 1950. A crowd of approximately 199,854 people packed into the Maracana, the largest official attendance ever recorded at a football match, then or since. Brazil scored first. Friaça, 2 minutes into the second half, 1-0. The stadium erupted. The trophy seemed, in that moment, to be already theirs. Then Uruguay equalized. Juan Schiaffino, with a finish from inside the area, 1-1. Brazil still only needed a draw. And then, in the 79th minute, Uruguay's right winger Alcides Guia broke down the right and shot past the Brazilian goalkeeper Moacir Barbosa. 2-1. Uruguay. The Maracanã, which had been filled with 200,000 people roaring in expectation of a Brazilian title, went silent. Not metaphorically silent. Actually silent. The stadium that had been built specifically for this moment had become, in an instant, the largest collective space of human disappointment ever recorded. The match ended 2-1. Uruguay had won the World Cup. In Brazil. Against Brazil. In the largest stadium ever built. In front of 200,000 Brazilian supporters who had come to celebrate their country's coronation and had been forced instead to witness the most catastrophic defeat in their footballing history. The result became, in Brazilian football vocabulary, the Maracanazo, the Maracanã blow, a word that did not exist before the 16th of July 1950, and that has been used ever since to describe what happened that day. Moacir Barbosa, the goalkeeper, would later say that in Brazil the maximum sentence for any crime was 30 years, and that he had served 50 for letting in Guia's goal. He carried the weight of the result for the rest of his life. The Maracanazo remains, 3/4 of a century later, one of the most discussed results in football history, and one of the foundational moments of the World Cup itself. The proof that the tournament could produce shocks no narrative could prepare for. 4. Hungary, 6, England, 3, at Wembley, November 25th, 1953. This moment is not, strictly speaking, a World Cup moment. It is included here because of what it produced. The 25th of November, 1953. Wembley Stadium. England against Hungary, in an international friendly. The match itself was supposed to be a routine demonstration of English footballing superiority. England had never been beaten at home by continental opposition. Their football was considered at the time to be the standard against which the rest of the world was measured. Hungary were the visiting curiosity, talented, technically interesting, but expected to be put in their place by the masters of the sport. What happened over the next 90 minutes changed football permanently. Hungary won 6-3. They played a style of football that England had never seen. Fluid attacking movements, positional rotations between forwards and midfielders that broke the conventional understanding of where players were supposed to be. A false nine, Nandor Hidekuti, who dropped deep to confuse the English defenders who had been trained to mark a traditional centre forward. A captain, Ferenc Puskás, who scored 2 goals of such technical quality that the watching English football establishment did not have a vocabulary to describe them. Sir Walter Winterbottom, the England manager, would later describe the experience as one of complete tactical disorientation. The England players had no answers. The match was, for long stretches, an exhibition. Hungary went into the 1954 World Cup as overwhelming favourites. What happened to them in that tournament, losing in the final to West Germany in the Miracle of Bern after dominating every other match they played, is one of the most discussed near misses in football history. But the 1953 match itself is included here because of what it demonstrated. that football could be played in ways that other nations had not yet imagined, that the tactical evolution of the sport was about to accelerate, that the international game was about to enter a new era of innovation and experiment. Without Hungary 6, England 3, the football of the next several decades would have developed differently. It is, in that sense, a foundational moment, even if it did not happen at a World Cup itself. 5. Just Fontaine's 13 goals. Sweden, 1958. The 1958 World Cup was held in Sweden. It is remembered by most people who know the tournament's history for one thing: the emergence of a 17-year-old Brazilian called Pelé, who scored 6 goals across the tournament, including a hat-trick in the semi-final and 2 in the final. But the leading scorer of the 1958 World Cup was not Pelé. The leading scorer was a French forward called Just Fontaine, who scored 13 goals in 6 matches, a record that has never been broken in the entire history of the competition since. 13 goals in a single tournament. For context, the next highest scorer in any World Cup before or since was Sandor Kocsis with 11 goals in 1954. Nobody else has approached Fontaine's number. Pelé's 6 in the same 1958 tournament places him a long way behind. Gerd Müller's 10 in 1970 stood as the record for decades, but never threatened Fontaine. Miroslav Klose's career total across 4 World Cups is 16. Fontaine got 13 in a single one. The story of Fontaine's tournament is the story of a player who arrived in Sweden almost as an afterthought. He was not the most famous French forward going into the World Cup. He was 24 years old playing for Reims, and had been called into the squad somewhat unexpectedly when the senior striker Raymond Koper adjusted to a deeper role. Fontaine took the opportunity. He scored a hat-trick against Paraguay in his first match, 2 against Yugoslavia, 1 against Scotland, 2 against Northern Ireland in the quarter-final, 1 against Brazil in the semi-final. The only goal France scored in a 5-2 defeat, and 4 in the third-place playoff against West Germany. 13 goals, 6 matches, an average of more than 2 goals per game across an entire World Cup. What is perhaps most remarkable about the record is that Fontaine's career was effectively over within 2 years of the tournament. He suffered a serious leg injury in 1960 and was forced to retire at the age of 28. He never played in another World Cup. The Sweden tournament was, by some distance, the high point of his career. The record he set in those 6 matches still stands. 67 years later, it is, on the available evidence, almost certainly never going to be broken. Chapter 2. The Pelé Era. The Pelé era of the World Cup ran from 1958 to 1970. 4 tournaments, 3 winners' medals, a record that nobody else has ever matched, and that is unlikely to be matched by anyone in the foreseeable future. In that span of 12 years, Pelé became the first global footballing icon, the first player whose fame transcended his sport, the first whose name was known to people who had never watched a football match. And the tournaments themselves in those years produced moments that defined what the World Cup was becoming. From Pelé's first goal at 17, to Bobby Moore's exchange of shirts with him in 1970, to the team that, by general consensus, played the most beautiful football the tournament has ever seen. 6 of those moments. 6. Pelé's first World Cup goal. Brazil versus Wales, June 19, 1958. Pelé was 17 years old. He had been included in the Brazil squad for the 1958 World Cup despite some debate about whether he was ready. He was injured at the start of the tournament. A knee problem had kept him out of the opening matches. By the quarter-final against Wales, he was fit enough to play. The match was tight. Wales were defending well. The Brazilian forwards had been struggling to break through. The score was 0-0 with 73 minutes played. A ball was played into the Welsh penalty area. Pelé received it with his back to goal, with a defender behind him. He took one touch to control the ball on his chest, flicked it over the defender with the same motion, and as the ball came down, he caught it with his right foot before it touched the ground. The finish went past the Welsh goalkeeper Jack Kelsey, who later said he had no idea how Pelé had created the chance, let alone scored it. 1-0. Brazil through to the semi-final. The goal itself was significant. The player who had scored it was about to become more significant. Pelé would go on to score a hat-trick in the semi-final against France, and then 2 more in the final against Sweden, including a goal in which he chipped the ball over a defender's head, ran around the defender, and volleyed it into the net before the ball touched the ground. He was 17 years old. The World Cup had its first true superstar. The era of Pelé had begun. 7. Pelé's goal in the 1958 final. Brazil versus Sweden, June 29, 1958. The 1958 World Cup final. Brazil against Sweden, the host nation. The match was tied 1-1 in the first half. Pelé's first contribution to the scoring came in the 55th minute. The ball came to him on the edge of the Swedish penalty area with the defender close behind. He chipped the ball over the defender's head, ran around him while the ball was still in the air, and volleyed it past the goalkeeper before it touched the ground. It was a goal of such audacity that the Swedish supporters in the stadium applauded it. He scored again later in the match. Brazil won 5-2. Pelé, 17 years old, was a World Cup winner. The image of him after the final whistle, being lifted onto his teammates' shoulders, weeping openly, holding the trophy, became one of the foundational images of football's transition into a global sport. A 17-year-old from a small Brazilian town had just become the most famous footballer in the world. The next 12 years of the World Cup would be defined by him. 8. Garrincha's Tournament, Chile, 1962. The 1962 World Cup was held in Chile. Pelé was again in the Brazilian squad. He scored against Mexico in the group stage, but against Czechoslovakia in the second match. He suffered a thigh injury that kept him out of the rest of the tournament. Brazil were defending champions. Without Pelé, they were not supposed to be able to do it. What followed was the Tournament of Garrincha. Manuel dos Santos, known to the world as Garrincha, was a winger of extraordinary technical quality whose right leg was significantly shorter than his left and significantly bent. He had been born with a disability. His playing style, which involved unbelievable changes of pace and direction that defenders simply could not anticipate, was in part a product of his physical asymmetry. The defenders did not know which way he was going to go, because nothing about his body told them. In the 1962 tournament, with Pelé absent, Garrincha became Brazil's central figure. He scored 2 goals against England in the quarter-final, 2 more against Chile in the semi-final, including a header from outside the area that flew past the Chilean goalkeeper. He was sent off in that semi-final, but his suspension was waived, allowing him to play in the final. Brazil beat Czechoslovakia 3-1 in the final. Garrincha was named the player of the tournament. Brazil won their second World Cup in a row. Pelé did not play after his early injury. The 1962 tournament demonstrated that the Brazilian footballing depth, even without its central figure, was beyond what any other nation could match. And it gave the World Cup one of its purest moments of attacking joy. The small, crooked man from a town called Pau Grande, beating defenders the way nobody had ever beaten them before. 9. The Moore-Pelé shirt swap. England versus Brazil. June 7, 1970. The 1970 World Cup was held in Mexico. In the group stage, Brazil were drawn against England, the defending champions, the nation that had won the 1966 tournament at Wembley. The match between them was, in retrospect, one of the most discussed group stage games in the tournament's history. The match was decided by a single Jairzinho goal. Brazil won 1-0. But the moment that is endured from the match is not the goal. It is what happened at the final whistle. Bobby Moore, the England captain, the man who had lifted the World Cup 4 years earlier, walked across to Pelé. They were both 29 years old, both at the peak of their careers, both, by general consensus at the time, the finest players in the world at their respective positions. They exchanged shirts. A simple gesture. Routine after international matches. Done thousands of times across the history of the sport. But the photograph that was taken at that moment of Moore and Pelé both holding each other's shirts, smiling at each other with the expressions of two men who recognized in each other something rare, became one of the iconic images of sport. It became iconic because of what it represented. Not just respect between two players, but the specific recognition between two men who knew they were among the best of their generation, who had played against each other in a match that mattered, and who could acknowledge each other openly as equals despite playing for rival nations. The image, Moore and Pelé, the captain of England and the captain of Brazil, has been reproduced more times than almost any other photograph in football. It is, in many ways, the image of the World Cup in the 1970s, a moment of grace between two men whose talent and dignity in that instant transcended the result of the match they had just played. 10. Banks's save from Pelé. England versus Brazil, June 7, 1970. The same match. The Moore-Pelé match. The 1-0 win for Brazil. Earlier in the same game, 10 minutes into the first half, a moment occurred that has been described by people who watch a lot of football as the greatest save ever made. A cross came into the England penalty area from the right side. Pelé, attacking the back post, met the ball with a downward header, the kind of header that strikers across history have been told to produce, because the angle is hardest for goalkeepers to deal with. The ball was struck downward, hard, toward the bottom corner of the goal. It bounced once in front of the line. It looked in real time like it was going in. Gordon Banks, the England goalkeeper who had won the 1966 World Cup 4 years earlier, somehow got to it. He moved across his goal, dived, reached down with his right hand, and somehow flicked the ball over the crossbar. The save itself was a moment of pure athletic genius. The geometry of it, the way Banks had to move across the goal, get down, get a hand under a ball that was bouncing toward the line, was almost impossibly difficult. Pelé himself, in interviews afterward, said he had already started celebrating. He had thought the goal was certain. He had not believed any goalkeeper could reach a header struck that way. Banks's save changed nothing about the result of the match. England lost 1-0 anyway. But the save itself became one of the touchstones of football, a reference point, the standard against which all subsequent saves would be measured, the greatest save ever made. by the captain of the Goalkeepers' Union against the king of the forwards in a group stage match at the 1970 World Cup. 11. Carlos Alberto's goal in the 1970 final. Brazil versus Italy, 21st June 1970. The 1970 final. Brazil against Italy. The Estadio Azteca, Mexico City. The match had been a procession. Brazil had been the better team throughout. They led 3-1 with a few minutes remaining. And then, in the closing moments, they produced a goal that has become, by widespread consensus, the most beautiful team goal ever scored at a World Cup. The move began in the Brazilian defensive third. The ball was worked across the back. It moved through midfield. Several Brazilian players touched it, passes that were not searching for anything in particular, that were simply maintaining possession with the kind of confident control that defines great teams when they have already decided a match. The ball came to Pelé in the centre of the pitch, near the edge of the Italian half. He held it. He looked up. He saw, with the kind of vision that defined his career, the Brazilian captain Carlos Alberto making a run from deep on the right. Carlos Alberto was the fullback. He had no business being where he was. Brazil were already 3-1 up. There was no tactical reason for him to be making a forward run. He was making it because he had seen the opportunity, and because his team was already in such control that he could. Pelé rolled the ball into Carlos Alberto's path. Not a hard pass, not a precise drive into space, a soft, almost casual roll, as though Pelé were inviting his captain to enjoy himself. Carlos Alberto ran onto the ball at full pace and struck it first time with his right foot. It travelled into the bottom corner of the Italian goal with such pace and certainty that the goalkeeper Enrico Albertosi barely moved. 4-1. The Brazilian celebrations that followed were specifically joyful. The match was won. The trophy was effectively theirs. Carlos Alberto's goal was not a goal that decided anything. It was a goal that demonstrated something. It demonstrated, in its construction and its finish, what the 1970 Brazil team was. The most fluent, most technically complete, most joyful World Cup champions the tournament had ever produced. Or, in the assessment of many who have watched the sport closely, the tournament has ever produced since. The goal, Brazil's fourth in the final, became the defining image of the Pelé era at its peak, a team operating at the absolute summit of football, producing a goal that did not need to be scored, simply because they could. Chapter 3. The Cruyff and total football era. The 1970s belonged to the Netherlands, or rather, the 1970s belonged to an idea that the Netherlands embodied more completely than any other nation. The idea was total football, the principle that every player on the pitch should be capable of playing in every position. That positions themselves were fluid rather than fixed. That a team that moved as a single intelligent organism, exchanging roles and spaces in real time, could overwhelm opponents who were locked into more rigid structures. It was a philosophy that came out of Ajax in the late 1960s and reached its full expression at the 1974 World Cup in West Germany, 5 moments from the era that the philosophy defined. 12. The Cruyff turn. Netherlands versus Sweden, June 19th, 1974. The 19th of June, 1974. A group stage match at the World Cup. Netherlands against Sweden. The match was tight, both teams probing without finding chances. In the second half, Johan Cruyff received the ball on the left side of the pitch, just outside the Swedish penalty area, He was being marked by the Swedish defender Jan Olsson. Cruyff turned his body as though he was about to play the ball back into midfield with the outside of his right foot. Olsson committed to the movement. He had to. The body shape Cruyff had shown was unmistakable. He was about to swing his right foot through the ball and send it backwards into the Dutch midfield. Olsson moved to intercept the pass. The ball did not go backwards. In the instant before his right foot connected with the ball, Cruyff drew it sharply behind his standing leg with the inside of his foot, spun his body, and accelerated in the opposite direction. The ball stayed with him. Olsson committed to the intercept that was never coming, stumbled past in the direction the ball was supposed to have gone. Cruyff was past him, into space, in the centre of the pitch. The move took less than 2 seconds. It happened so quickly that the Swedish television commentary did not register what had happened until Cruyff was already 3 steps clear of Olsson. The Cruyff turn was not invented at that moment. Players had been using variations of it for years. But the version Cruyff produced against Sweden, the body shape, the timing, the execution, was so clean and so visible that the move became permanently associated with him. It has been imitated millions of times since, by professional footballers in the World Cup, by Sunday League players, by children in playgrounds. The move that Johan Cruyff produced against Sweden in a 1974 group, stage, match has become one of the most repeated pieces of footballing footage in the history of the sport. The match itself ended 0-0. The moment that defined it, and that defined Cruyff's tournament, is replayed every day, somewhere in the world, by someone who saw it and wanted to do it themselves. 13. Gerd Müller's winning goal in the 1974 final. West Germany versus Netherlands, July 7th, 1974. The 1974 World Cup final. West Germany against the Netherlands. The match has been told elsewhere in this series, the Netherlands going 1-0 up before West Germany had touched the ball. The equaliser from Paul Breitner. The home crowd in Munich watching the team they had been hoping for actually fight back into a final. They had been losing. The decisive moment came in the 43rd minute. Gerd Müller, der Bomber, the German striker who had been the leading goalscorer of the 1970 World Cup, who would finish his international career with 68 goals in 62 matches, received the ball in the Dutch penalty area. The pass came to him at an awkward angle, slightly behind him with a defender close. He turned. He swung his left foot at the ball. The contact was not perfect. The shot was scuffed, hit with the side of his foot rather than cleanly through the laces. It travelled low along the ground, away from the Dutch goalkeeper Jan Jongbloed. It bounced once. It crossed the line. 2-1. The goal was not a beautiful goal, it was a poacher's goal. The kind of finish that Müller had built his career on. The kind of finish that didn't require space or time, that required only the instinct to be in the right position and the technique to convert the chance that the position created. West Germany held on. They won the match. Gerd Müller had scored the goal that won the 1974 World Cup. He retired from international football immediately after the tournament. He was 28 years old. He had decided before the final that this would be his last international match. The goal was his last for his country. It was, in the end, the perfect way for the most efficient German goalscorer of his era to finish his international career. A scuffed shot in a World Cup final. That won the World Cup. 14. Mario Kempes and the ticker tape. Argentina, 1978. The 1978 World Cup was held in Argentina. The tournament has been discussed elsewhere in this series. the political context of the military dictatorship that hosted it, the questions about how the host nation had reached the final, the complicated legacy that even Argentina supporters acknowledge. But the football itself, and specifically one player who defined the tournament, deserves its own moment. Mario Kempes was 23 years old, a forward playing for Valencia in Spain. The tournament was a homecoming for him, his first World Cup in front of his own people, with the specific weight of representing a host nation that needed to win. He scored 6 goals across the tournament. His 2 goals in the final against the Netherlands, including the goal that broke a 1-1 deadlock in extra time, a finish from close range after a Dutch defender had blocked his initial effort, were what won Argentina the World Cup. But the moment that has endured is not specifically a goal. It is the atmosphere in which Kempes scored those goals. The 1978 final was played in the Estadio Monumental in Buenos Aires. The Argentine supporters had developed the habit across the tournament of throwing paper streamers and ticker tape onto the pitch before kick-off and at moments of celebration. By the time of the final, the practice had reached its peak. The pitch was almost invisible at the start of the match, covered in white and blue paper that had to be cleared before play could begin. Every time Argentina attacked, more paper rained down. Every time they scored, the stadium became a snowstorm of celebration. Kempes celebrating his goals in the middle of that ticker tape, hair flowing, both arms raised, running toward the corner flag with the streamers cascading around him, became the defining image of the tournament. It was a celebration that contained in the same image the joy of a footballer scoring in a World Cup final, and the political circumstances under which the celebration was occurring, the supporters who threw the paper, the regime that benefited from the result, the player who, regardless of context, had scored the goals that made the celebration possible. Kempes won the Golden Ball as the tournament's best player. Argentina won their first World Cup. The image of him running through the ticker tape and the image of the empty pitch beneath the streamers has remained one of the most evocative and most complicated moments in the tournament's history. 15. Algeria beating West Germany, June 16th, 1982. The 16th of June, 1982. Gijón, Spain. Algeria against West Germany in the opening match of Group 2 at the 1982 World Cup. West Germany were the defending European champions. They had been finalists at the previous World Cup. They were one of the favourites for the tournament. Algeria were making only their second appearance at a World Cup. They had never won a match at the competition. The match was supposed to be a formality. It was not a formality. Algeria led 1-0 at half-time through Rabah Majer. West Germany equalised early in the second half. And then with 8 minutes to play, Lakhdar Belloumi scored from close range to put Algeria back ahead. 2-1. The match ended that way. Algeria had beaten West Germany. The shock, the seismic, world-altering shock of an African nation beating one of the European football superpowers, produced reactions across the football world. The Algerian players celebrated as though they had won the tournament. The West German players walked off in something approaching disbelief. The Algerian press, which had not been expecting a serious result, struggled to find words for what had just happened. The result itself was undermined later in the tournament by the infamous disgrace of Gijón, in which West Germany and Austria played out a 1-0 German win that suited both teams and eliminated Algeria on goal difference. The match between West Germany and Austria was widely condemned as having been arranged to produce the result both sides needed. FIFA would, in response, change the rules. From 1986 onwards, the final group matches would be played simultaneously to prevent the kind of mutual non-effort that had eliminated Algeria. But the Algerian victory itself, in the opening match against West Germany, remains one of the great World Cup upsets. The proof that the African nations, long dismissed by the European football establishment as developmental rather than competitive, were capable of beating the best in the world on any given day. 16. Paolo Rossi's hat-trick against Brazil, July 5, 1982. The 5th of July 1982, the Estadio Sarriá in Barcelona. Brazil against Italy in the second group stage of the 1982 World Cup. This was the match, discussed at length in the World Cup history video and in the introductory chapters of this series, that ended what many people considered the most beautiful Brazilian team since 1970. The Brazil of 1982 was Socrates and Falcao and Zico and Rivellino, a team built on attacking flair, a team that had played football of such fluid technical quality across the tournament that the football world had been preparing in the days before the Italy match to celebrate the inevitability of their progression. They needed only a draw to advance to the semi-finals. Italy needed to win. Paolo Rossi was Italy's striker. He had been recently allowed to return to football after a 2-year ban for involvement in a match-fixing scandal in Italian club football. He had not scored a goal in 5 matches at the 1982 World Cup before this game. He had been heavily criticised in the Italian press. The Italian manager Enzo Bearzot had been criticised for continuing to pick him. The match. Rossi scored after 5 minutes, a header from a Cabrini cross, 1-0. Brazil equalised within 10 minutes through Socrates. Rossi scored again after 25 minutes. A finish from close range after a Brazilian defensive error, 2-1. Brazil came back. Falcao equalised in the 68th minute. The Brazilian supporters in Barcelona, who had been silenced by Rossi's 2 goals, erupted. 2-2. Brazil still in the lead on goal difference, still progressing. And then, in the 74th minute, Italy won a corner. Rossi met the corner with his head from close range. The header went past the Brazilian goalkeeper Waldir Perez. 3-2. Italy held on. The match ended 3-2. Italy went through. Brazil, the most beautiful team in the tournament, went home. Rossi had scored a hat-trick. He went on to score in every remaining match Italy played. He won the Golden Boot with 6 goals. He won the Golden Ball as the tournament's best player. Italy won the World Cup. The redemption story was extraordinary. A player who had been a national embarrassment 2 months earlier had become, by the end of July, a national hero. The captain Dino Zoff lifted the trophy. Italy celebrated their 3rd World Cup. And the Brazil of Socrates and Zico, the team that had played the most beautiful football of the tournament, went home with nothing. The image of Zico walking off the pitch in Barcelona, head bowed, has remained one of the defining moments of the tournament's capacity for cruelty. The best team did not win. The team that took its chances did. Chapter 4. The Maradona Tournament. The 1986 World Cup was Diego Maradona's tournament, the most complete individual performance in the history of the competition, the most one-man triumph the sport has ever witnessed. A player who, across 7 matches in a single month, dragged a team to the World Cup almost single-handedly and produced moments that have entered football's permanent vocabulary. 4 of those moments. 17. The Hand of God. Argentina versus England. June 22, 1986. The 22nd of June, 1986. The Estadio Azteca, Mexico City. Argentina against England in the quarter-final. The political context of the match was significant. The Falklands War had been fought between Argentina and the United Kingdom 4 years earlier. The matches between the two nations carried a weight that went beyond football. Players from both sides spoke before the game about putting the war in the past, but the supporters in the stadium and across both nations understood that this match was about more than the World Cup. The first half was tense and goalless, both teams probing, the match cautious. In the 51st minute, an Argentine attack worked its way into the English penalty area. A defender's clearance went up into the air. Maradona, running into the area, jumped to meet the ball. The English goalkeeper, Peter Shilton, 6'1", jumped at the same time. The ball ended up in the English net. The replays, which were not available to the referee in real time, showed what had happened. Maradona, knowing he could not reach the ball with his head, had punched it into the goal with his left fist. The fist was raised above his head, concealed behind his face from the angle of the referee, but unmistakable in the broadcast footage. The Tunisian referee did not see the handball. The Argentine players celebrated as though the goal was legitimate. Maradona himself ran toward the corner flag with the celebration of a player who had just scored a perfectly normal goal. The goal stood. 1-0 Argentina. In the press conference after the match, Maradona was asked about the goal. The famous quote that followed was that the goal had been scored a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. The hand of God. The phrase entered football vocabulary that day and has never left it. The English players and supporters were furious. The match and the result. England eventually lost 2-1, became one of the most discussed moments of contention in the World Cup's history. The arguments about whether Maradona should have admitted the handball, whether the referee should have spotted it, whether the goal should have been disallowed retrospectively, have continued for 40 years. What is uncontested is what happened next. 4 minutes after the hand of God, Maradona produced what is almost universally considered the greatest goal ever scored at a World Cup. 18. The goal of the century. Argentina versus England, June 22nd, 1986. The 55th minute of the same match. Maradona received the ball in his own half, on the right side of the pitch, just outside the centre circle. He was facing his own goal. He turned with the ball. What happened over the next 10 seconds has been described in football journalism more times than almost any other passage of play in the history of the sport. He beat Peter Beardsley. He beat Peter Reid. He beat Terry Butcher. Once, then again, with a body shift that made Butcher lunge in the wrong direction. He beat Terry Fenwick. By this point he was at full pace, running diagonally toward the English penalty area. The ball stuck to his left foot, the English defenders all behind him or recovering at angles that would not catch him. He rounded the goalkeeper Peter Shilton. Butcher came across to make one last desperate attempt to recover. Maradona, slightly off balance from rounding Shilton, slid the ball into the empty net with his left foot as Butcher fell behind him. 60 metres. 5 England players beaten. 10 seconds from start to finish. A goal scored entirely by one player against an opposition that was, at the time, one of the most respected international defensive units in the world. The Argentine commentator on the radio broadcast, Victor Hugo Morales, produced one of the most famous pieces of football commentary in any language. Cosmic Kite. What planet are you from? Genius. 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 The goal has been voted, in multiple polls over the decades, the greatest goal in the history of the World Cup, the greatest goal in the history of football, the greatest individual goal in the history of sport, It is difficult to argue with any of those rankings. The goal was also the perfect counterpoint to the hand of God. In the space of 4 minutes, Maradona had produced both the most controversial goal in the tournament's history and the most beautiful. The same player, the same match, the same opposition. The hand of God was Maradona at his most cynical. The goal of the century was Maradona at his most sublime. Both were part of the same match. Both were part of the same player. Both have, in the years since, become inseparable from each other in the way the 1986 World Cup is remembered. 19. Maradona's assist for Burruchaga in the final. Argentina versus West Germany, June 29, 1986. The 1986 World Cup final. Argentina against West Germany. The Estadio Azteca again. The same stadium where the hand of God and the goal of the century had been scored a week earlier. The match had been a back-and-forth affair. Argentina had led 2-0. West Germany had equalized. The score was 2-2 with 8 minutes remaining when Maradona produced the moment that won Argentina the World Cup. He received the ball in his own half, on the right side. The Germans were pressing. 3 players closed him down immediately. Maradona, with his back to the German goal, took one touch to control. Then another. And then he split 2 defenders with a pass that went between them, directly into the path of Jorge Burruchaga, who was running into space behind the German defensive line. Burruchaga had no defender between him and the goal. He ran onto the ball. He shot. He scored. 3-2. Argentina. The pass itself, Maradona's pass, was the moment. The goal was a finish. But the pass was the creation. The vision required to see Burruchaga's run, the timing required to release the ball at exactly the moment that would make the offside trap fail, the technique required to play a pass with that weight, under that pressure. All of it was the demonstration of why Maradona had been the player of the tournament. The 1986 World Cup was decided by that pass. Argentina won the match 3-2. They were world champions. Maradona had been involved, directly or indirectly, in every important moment of Argentina's tournament. He had scored 5 goals across the competition. He had assisted 5 more. He had produced individual moments, the hand of God, the goal of the century, this assist for Burruchaga, that would, in different ways, all become part of football's permanent vocabulary. There has never been an individual World Cup performance like it. It is, by widespread agreement, the closest any player has ever come to winning a World Cup on his own. 20. Maradona lifting the trophy. June 29, 1986. The image that completed the tournament. Maradona at the center of the celebration. The Argentine captain, the captain of his country. The Jules Rimet trophy. The replacement trophy that had been commissioned after the original was stolen from Brazil in 1983. Held above his head with both hands. The expression on his face was specific. It was not the unguarded ecstasy of a young player winning their first major trophy. Maradona had been carrying the weight of Argentina for years. He had been carrying the weight of comparison to Pelé. He had been carrying the weight of expectation from a country that had won the previous World Cup and demanded another. He had delivered in the most complete possible way. The face he showed at the moment of lifting the trophy was the face of a man who had answered every question that could have been asked of him. He had won the World Cup. He had been the best player in the tournament, by a distance. He had produced moments that would be remembered for the rest of football history. The image of Maradona holding the trophy in the Estadio Azteca on the 29th of June 1986 has remained, for nearly 4 decades, one of the most reproduced photographs in football. It is the image of a player at the absolute summit. The image of one man's tournament completed. Chapter 5. The Drama Era. The late 1980s, into the 1990s, produced a different kind of World Cup. Less dominant teams, more upsets, more heartbreak, more moments that have become permanent fixtures in the memory of anyone who watched football during those years. 7 moments from the era. 21. Cameroon beating Argentina, June 8, 1990. The opening match of the 1990 World Cup, Italia 90. The Stadio San Siro, Milan. Argentina, the defending champions, were taking on Cameroon, an African nation that had qualified for only their second World Cup and who were not, in the pre-tournament forecasts, expected to do much. What followed was one of the great World Cup upsets. Cameroon defended with extraordinary discipline. They tackled hard. They committed fouls. 2 of their players were sent off across the match. But they refused to break. Argentina, with Maradona at his peak as the world's best player, could not find a way through. In the 67th minute, Cameroon scored. A header from Francois Omambiik, a forward who had been struggling for fitness coming into the tournament. The ball travelled past the Argentine goalkeeper, Nery Pumpido, with the specific quality of a goal that should not have happened to the world champions in their opening match. Cameroon held on for the remaining 23 minutes, plus stoppage time. Despite being reduced to 9 players in the closing stages, they kept Argentina out. The match ended 1-0. The shock reverberated across the football world. Cameroon, a country whose football had been dismissed as developmental by the European establishment, had beaten the world champions in the opening match of the tournament. The result became the foundation of a tournament run that took Cameroon all the way to the quarter-finals, where they were eliminated by England. It also became one of the moments that, in retrospect, signalled the changing balance of international football. The African nations were no longer outsiders. They were genuine competitors. Cameroon proved it, in the most public possible way, at the Stadio San Siro, on the 8th of June, 1990. 22. Roger Miller's celebrations. Italy, 1990. The Cameroon tournament of 1990 produced one player who became a global icon almost overnight. Roger Milla was 38 years old. He had retired from international football in 1987. He had been brought back into the Cameroonian squad for the 1990 World Cup as a senior figure, a substitute, an experienced presence, more than an expected starter. He scored 4 goals across the tournament, 2 against Romania in the group stage, 2 against Colombia in the round of 16, all 4 arriving from off the bench. But it was not just the goals, it was the celebrations. Miller developed across the tournament a specific celebration that he would perform after every goal he scored. He would run to the corner flag, position himself next to it, and dance. Not a brief gesture. A full hip-swiveling, deliberate dance. The kind of celebration that was unlike anything the World Cup had seen before. The kind of celebration that crossed cultural boundaries. Supporters from countries that had never followed African football watched a 38-year-old man dancing at a corner flag and felt something pure about it. The celebrations became one of the iconic images of Italia 90. They were replayed on television networks around the world. They became part of the visual identity of the tournament. And they became part of football's broader vocabulary. The corner flag dance, performed in various forms by countless players since, traces directly back to Roger Miller in Italy in the summer of 1990. A 38-year-old man who had retired 3 years earlier, brought back for one more tournament, producing not just goals, but a way of celebrating them that the entire world watched and remembered. Natiti. Gaza's Tears. England versus West Germany, July 4th, 1990. The semi-final of the 1990 World Cup, England against West Germany. Stadio delle Alpi, Turin. The match had been tight throughout. Both teams creating chances, both teams defending well, neither team able to find the breakthrough. In the 99th minute of the match, extra time with the score level at 1-1, Paul Gascoigne committed a foul on the German midfielder Thomas Berthold. The referee booked him. The booking itself was a routine event in the match, but what it meant for Gascoigne was significant. It was his second yellow card of the tournament. Under the rules of the competition, a second yellow card meant suspension from the next match. If England won the semi-final and reached the final, Gascoigne would miss it. The realization hit him visibly. The cameras caught him standing on the pitch, his face slowly changing as the reality of what the booking meant registered. The lower lip beginning to tremble, the eyes filling. He cried. In front of 62,000 people in the stadium and hundreds of millions watching on television around the world, the most gifted English footballer of his generation cried about a yellow card. The image, Gascoigne with tears running down his face, surrounded by teammates trying to comfort him while the match continued around them, became one of the defining images of Italia 90. It became iconic because of what it represented. The vulnerability of a player at the absolute peak of the sport, the recognition that beneath the professionalism, the bravado, the apparent confidence of the elite athlete, there was a young man who cared so much about the World Cup that the prospect of missing a final could reduce him to tears. England lost the match on penalties. Gascoigne would not have needed to miss the final. But the image had been made. It remains one of the most reproduced football photographs in English football history. The moment Paul Gascoigne cried at the World Cup. The moment that, for an entire generation of English football supporters, turned a national disappointment into a deeply human one. 24. Shilasi's goals, Italia 90. The 1990 World Cup was hosted by Italy. The pre-tournament expectations were for the host nation to challenge seriously for the title. The squad was strong. Roberto Baggio, Franco Baresi, Paolo Maldini, Giuseppe Bergomi. The football the country had been producing in the qualifying campaign had been impressive. What nobody had predicted was the emergence of Salvatore Schillaci. Toto Schillaci was a Sicilian forward. He was 25 years old. He had been included in the Italian squad as a backup option, not as an expected starter. He had spent the previous season at Juventus, but he was not, going into the tournament, considered one of the elite Italian forwards. He scored 6 goals across the tournament. He started on the bench in Italy's opening match against Austria. He came on as a substitute. He scored. Italy won 1-0. He started against Czechoslovakia. He scored. Italy won 2-0. He started against the United States. He scored. He started against Uruguay in the round of 16. He scored. He started against Ireland in the quarter-final. He scored. By the time Italy reached the semi-final against Argentina, Schillaci had become the central figure of the tournament, a player nobody outside Italian football had heard of before the World Cup, who was now the leading goal scorer and the most discussed forward in the competition. Italy lost the semi-final to Argentina on penalties. Schillaci scored Italy's only goal in normal time. In the third-place playoff against England, he scored again. 6 goals, the golden boot, his celebrations, eyes wide, mouth open, arms held out from his sides, became as iconic as Roger Miller's corner flag dance. They were the celebrations of a man who could not quite believe what was happening to him, who had arrived at the tournament as an afterthought and was leaving as a national hero. Shalaxi's tournament was the kind of story that only the World Cup can produce. The player who arrives unknown and leaves, having defined the entire competition. He never quite reached that level again. His club career, after Italia 90, was respectable, but not exceptional. He retired in 1999, but for one summer, in Italy, in front of his own people, he was the most discussed footballer in the world. 25. The Cradle Celebration, Romario and Bebeto, July 9th, 1994. The 1994 World Cup was held in the United States, the most successful World Cup in commercial terms ever organized. A tournament that brought football to the largest national market that had not previously embraced it. Brazil were one of the favorites. Their attacking partnership, Romario and Bebeto, was the most discussed forward line in the tournament. Both players were having extraordinary individual seasons at their clubs. Together, they form one of the great Brazilian striking partnerships. In the quarter-final against the Netherlands, Bebeto scored Brazil's second goal. The Dutch came back to make it 2-2 before Branco won it for Brazil with a free kick. But the moment that has endured from the match was Bebeto's celebration. Bebeto's wife had given birth to their son Matthias 3 days before the match. Bebeto had been receiving congratulations from teammates and supporters across the camp. The pregnancy had been a subplot of his tournament. When he scored, he ran toward the corner flag. He held his arms out in front of him as though cradling a baby, and he rocked them from side to side, mimicking the gesture of holding a newborn. Romario arrived at the celebration. He performed the same gesture. The midfielder Mazinho joined them. 3 Brazilian players on the touchline of a World Cup quarter-final, rocking imaginary babies in their arms. The celebration became one of the most reproduced in football. It has been performed by countless players over the years following the birth of their own children. The cradle celebration, like Miller's corner flag dance, entered the permanent vocabulary of football celebrations. Brazil went on to win the 1994 World Cup, their first title since 1970. Romario won the Golden Ball as the tournament's best player. Bebeto formed half of the most respected striking partnership of his generation. But the image of the cradle, 3 grown men celebrating an imaginary baby on a touchline in the United States, has remained one of the most enduring of the tournament. 26. Baggio's missed penalty. Italy versus Brazil, July 17th, 1994. The 1994 World Cup final. Italy against Brazil. The Rose Bowl, Pasadena. A match that had been tight, low-scoring, defensively organized. Both teams playing within themselves, trying not to lose more than they were trying to win. The match went to extra time, then to penalties. Brazil scored their first 3 penalties. Italy missed 1. Brazil scored their 4th. Italy needed Roberto Baggio to score their 5th to keep the shootout alive. Baggio was Italy's central figure. He had been the player of the tournament. He had been the player who had carried Italy through the knockout rounds, scoring decisive goals against Spain in the quarter-final, against Bulgaria in the semi-final, dragging a team that had not always been at its best into the final. He was 27 years old, the divine ponytail, the most discussed Italian footballer of his generation. He walked to the penalty spot. He placed the ball, he stepped back, he ran in. He struck the ball, it went over the bar, by several feet. The miss was not narrow. It was not close. The ball flew over the crossbar with the kind of clearance that suggested a player who, in the most important moment of his career, had been unable to make contact with the ball in the way he had intended. Brazil were World Cup champions. Baggio stood on the penalty spot with his hands on his hips. The cameras caught him for a long moment. His head bowed, his ponytail visible against the back of his shirt. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who knew immediately what had just happened, and who knew he would carry it for the rest of his life. The image of Baggio after the missed penalty, alone, surrounded by celebrating Brazilians, looking at the ground, became one of the most reproduced photographs in the history of football. It is the image of a player at the absolute moment of failure on the biggest stage in sport. He went on to have an excellent club career. He played for Italy at the 1998 World Cup, scoring against Norway in the group stage. He retired in 2004 as one of the most beloved Italian footballers of the modern era. But the image of him after the missed penalty in 1994 has remained for the rest of his career, for the rest of his life. What he is most associated with. The closest he came to winning a World Cup. And the moment he did not. 27. Bergkamp's goal. Netherlands versus Argentina, July 4th, 1998. The 1998 World Cup quarter-final. Netherlands against Argentina. Velodrome Stadium, Marseille. The match was tight. Both teams had scored. The score was 1-1, with seconds remaining in normal time. Extra time was beginning to look inevitable. In the 89th minute, the Dutch defender Frank de Boer received the ball in his own half. He looked up. He saw across the entire pitch Dennis Bergkamp making a run in behind the Argentine defence. He hit it. A pass of approximately 60 metres. Through the air, travelling with the trajectory of a punt rather than a controlled long ball. Bergkamp brought it down with one touch. The first touch was the entire goal. A 60-metre pass arriving at speed and Bergkamp absorbing the pace of it with the outside of his right foot in a single movement that left the ball directly in front of him, in his stride, with the Argentine defender Roberto Ayala behind him, and no obstacle between him and the goal. The second touch was the finish. With the outside of the same right foot, Bergkamp lifted the ball over the Argentine goalkeeper Carlos Roa into the top corner. 3 touches, total, from a 60-metre pass to the goal. The Dutch commentator Jack van Gelder produced one of the most famous pieces of football commentary in Dutch language. Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Oh, Dennis Bergkamp! It was the goal that put the Netherlands into the semi-finals. It was the goal of the tournament. It was, by widespread agreement, one of the most technically beautiful goals ever scored at a World Cup. The combination of the pass, the first touch, the second touch, the finish, all of it executed in real time, under pressure, in a knockout match, in the closing seconds of normal time, became one of the great demonstrations of technical excellence at the highest level of football. The Netherlands lost the semi-final to Brazil on penalties. Bergkamp's tournament ended in disappointment. But his goal against Argentina has remained one of the defining moments of the 1998 World Cup. A demonstration that, at its best, football can produce moments of such technical purity that they stop being athletic achievements and become something closer to art. Chapter 6. The Modern Classics. The late 1990s into the 2010s, the era in which the World Cup became the defining global event in sport, where the production values matched the football, where the broadcasts reached audiences that previous generations could not have imagined, and where the moments produced were watched, in real time, by more people than any other regular event on the planet. 10 moments from the era. 28. Zidane's 2 headers. France versus Brazil, July 12, 1998. The 1998 World Cup final. France against Brazil. The Stade de France, Saint-Denis. Zinedine Zidane had been the central creative figure of the French team across the tournament, but he had not scored. He was a midfielder. His role was to create rather than to finish. The expectation in the final was that he would do the same, to organize the French attack, to find passes, to be the conductor. He was not, in any reasonable football analysis, an aerial threat. He was tall, but he was not a player who specialized in attacking crosses. He had not scored a header for France before the final. In the 27th minute, he scored one. A corner from Emmanuel Petit on the left side. Zidane arriving in the penalty area at the back post. He met the ball with his head. A clean downward header struck with the kind of timing and power that the best aerial forwards spend their careers learning to produce. 1-0 France. The Brazilian defence was visibly shocked. The cross had been delivered to the area Zidane occupied because he was supposed to be a secondary threat, not a primary one. The Brazilian centre-backs had been marking the French forwards. Zidane had arrived unmarked. He had scored. 18 minutes later, in the 45th minute, he scored another header from a corner, a different corner, from the opposite side, delivered by Petit again. Zidane again arriving at the back post, again meeting the ball with his head, again scoring with a downward header that the Brazilian goalkeeper Claudio Taffarel could not reach. 2-0. In the space of 18 minutes, the French midfielder, who was not supposed to be a goalscorer, had scored 2 headed goals in the World Cup final. France went on to win 3-0. Zidane was named the player of the tournament. The image of him after the match, surrounded by teammates celebrating with the crowd in the Stade de France, became one of the defining images of French football. The 2 headers were not the most beautiful goals Zidane ever scored. They were technically relatively orthodox. What made them iconic was the context, that a player whose game had not been built on aerial ability had produced 2 of the most decisive headers in World Cup final history, in the most important match of his career. 29. Ronaldinho's chip over Seaman, Brazil versus England, 21st June 2002. The 2002 World Cup quarter-final. Brazil against England. Shizuoka, Japan. The moment has been told elsewhere in this series. In the Brazil 2002 video specifically, where the entire context of the match and Ronaldinho's tournament was covered in depth. The 50th minute. A free kick on the left side, some 35 metres from the English goal. The conventional option was a cross into the area. Ronaldinho stood over the ball. He saw David Seaman positioned toward his near post, slightly off his line. He struck the ball. The shot, or the cross, depending on which interpretation you believe, travelled with a strange combination of pace and topspin. It floated. It dipped. It cleared Seaman, who was caught wrong-footed and unable to recover, and it landed in the back of the net. 2-1. The debate about whether Ronaldinho meant it has continued for the entire 2 decades since. His own answers have been inconsistent. The most likely truth, and the truth that his teammates have generally suggested in their more candid moments, is that the goal was intentional, that Ronaldinho saw Seaman off his line, calculated the chip, and executed it. What is undisputed is the smile. After the goal, Ronaldinho ran toward the corner flag with the specific gap-toothed grin that became one of his defining features. The smile of a player who was simply enjoying himself at the World Cup quarter-final. The smile of a player whose football was an expression of joy as much as athletic competition. The goal and the smile has remained one of the iconic moments of the 2002 tournament. The chip over Seaman has been replayed countless times. It has been imitated by countless players. It has become one of the most distinctive individual goals in the modern history of the World Cup. 30. Senegal beating France, May 31st, 2002. The opening match of the 2002 World Cup. France against Senegal. Seoul World Cup Stadium, South Korea. France were the defending champions, the European champions, the team that had won the 1998 World Cup at home, and the 2000 European Championship in Belgium and the Netherlands. They were on a run that had established them, in the pre-tournament forecasts, as the clear favourites for the title. Senegal were making their first appearance at a World Cup. The match was supposed to be a formality. It was not a formality. Senegal defended deep and attacked on the break. Their players, most of whom played their club football in France, were technically excellent and physically strong. They closed down the French midfield. They denied Zinedine Zidane the spaces he had used to dominate matches across his career. Zidane was injured for the match. He had picked up a thigh problem in a friendly before the tournament and was missing from the French starting 11. France were without their most important player. In the 30th minute, Senegal scored. Papa Bouba Diop, a midfielder who played his club football for Lens in France, latched onto a loose ball in the French penalty area and finished from close range. 1-0. France could not respond. Across the remaining hour they pressed for an equaliser, but Senegal's defensive structure held. The match ended 1-0. The shock was seismic. The defending champions had been beaten by a team making their first World Cup appearance. The result became one of the great opening match upsets in the tournament's history. France went on to be eliminated in the group stage. They did not score a single goal across their 3 matches. The defending champions left the tournament with 1 point. The worst defence of a title in the modern era of the World Cup. Senegal went on to reach the quarter-finals, eliminated by Turkey on a golden goal. In a tournament run that announced African football, for the second time in the modern era after Cameroon in 1990, as a genuine competitive force. The opening match shock at the Seoul World Cup Stadium on the 31st of May 2002 was the moment that announced it. 31. Ronaldo's 2 goals in the 2002 final. June 30th, 2002. The complete context for these goals has been covered in the Brazil 2002 episode of this series. The 4 years of darkness, the 2 ruptured tendons, the collapse before the 1998 final, the slow recovery, the selection by Scolari, the 5 goals across the tournament before the final itself, the 67th minute of the 2002 World Cup final. The first goal arrived through a Rivaldo shot that Oliver Kahn parried into Ronaldo's path. Ronaldo finished it low into the corner of the German goal. The 79th minute, the second goal, Ronaldo running onto a pass from Kleberson, striking the ball low past Kahn into the bottom corner with a finish of complete clinical precision. 2 goals, 1 match. The World Cup final. 8 goals across the tournament. The Golden Boot. The redemption complete. The image of Ronaldo after the final whistle. The gap-toothed smile back. the cameras catching him weeping with the trophy in the background, has become one of the defining personal moments in the history of the tournament. The boy from Bento Ribeiro who had been broken in Paris had been remade in Yokohama. The redemption story was complete. 32. Zidane's headbutt. France versus Italy, July 9th, 2006. The 2006 World Cup final. France against Italy. The Olympia Stadion, Berlin. The match had been tight throughout. France had taken the lead through a Zidane penalty. Italy had equalized. The match went to extra time. The score was still 1-1 with 7 minutes of extra time remaining. Zidane was 34 years old. This was his last match. He had announced before the tournament that he would retire from football after the World Cup, regardless of the result. The 2006 tournament had been a remarkable late-career run for him. He had played some of the most influential football of his career across the knockout rounds, including a Panenka penalty in the final. In the 110th minute of the match, he was walking toward the Italian penalty area when he had an exchange of words with the Italian defender Marco Materazzi. Materazzi said something. Zidane took a few steps. Then he turned, stopped, and headbutted Materazzi in the chest. Materazzi fell to the ground. The fourth official saw the incident. The referee, after a brief consultation, produced a red card. Zidane walked off the pitch. The image that followed was extraordinary. Zidane walking past the World Cup trophy that was sitting on its plinth, ready for the presentation ceremony that would follow the match. His career ending, not with a celebration, but with a red card. The Italian players still on the pitch, watching him leave. France went on to lose the match on penalties. Italy were World Cup champions. Zidane was named the player of the tournament, the vote having been completed before the headbutt. The conversation about what Materazzi had said has continued for almost 2 decades. The most commonly accepted account, based on lip reading and on subsequent interviews, is that Materazzi had made an insulting remark about Zidane's sister. Zidane himself, in subsequent interviews, has maintained the basic version of the story without confirming exact wording. The headbutt has remained one of the most discussed moments in the history of the World Cup. The career of one of football's most graceful technicians, ending with a moment of pure violence. The image of Zidane walking past the trophy he would never lift has become one of the most reproduced photographs in football. The end of the 2006 World Cup, and the end of one of the most distinguished international careers of the modern era. 33. Iniesta's winning goal, Spain versus Netherlands, July 11th, 2010. The complete context for this goal has been covered in the Spain 2010 episode of this series, the 116th minute of the 2010 World Cup final. The score level at 0-0. The match had been physically violent. Nigel de Jong's chest-high kick on Xabi Alonso. 14 yellow cards across 90 minutes. A final that had become an exhibition of disruption rather than football. Cesc Fabregas received the ball in midfield. He played a pass forward through the Dutch defence. Andrés Iniesta arrived onto the pass. He took one touch to set himself. He struck the ball with his right foot. The shot, clean, low, hard, went past Martin Stekelenburg into the bottom right corner of the Dutch goal. 1-0. Spain. Iniesta ran toward the corner flag. He pulled his shirt off, a yellow card for the celebration, but who cared? Underneath, on his white undershirt, were the words Dani Jarque, siempre con nosotros. Dani Jarque, always with us. A tribute to his friend who had died the previous summer. The goal won Spain the World Cup. The most beautiful football the international game had ever seen had finally produced the trophy it deserved. The 76-year wait was over. The image of Iniesta celebrating with the Dani Jarque tribute on his shirt has remained one of the most emotionally complete moments in modern World Cup history. 34. Tim Cahill's volley. Australia vs Netherlands, June 18th, 2014. The 2014 World Cup. Australia against the Netherlands. The Estadio Beira Rio, Porto Alegre, Brazil. Australia were not expected to compete with the Netherlands. The Dutch had reached the previous World Cup final. They had top-quality players across their squad. Australia were ranked outside the top 50 in the world. Robin van Persie had scored to put the Netherlands 1-0 up early in the match. In the 21st minute, an Australian counter-attack worked the ball to the left. A long ball was lifted across the field, travelling some 50 metres through the air toward the Australian forward Tim Cahill, who was running into the Dutch penalty area. Cahill timed his approach to meet the ball as it came down. He struck it on the volley with his left foot, on the half volley, the ball just dropping toward shoulder height before he made contact. The shot, struck with pure power and pure technique, flew across the Dutch goal, struck the inside of the right post, and bounced into the net. 1-1. The volley itself was the moment. The ball had been delivered to Cahill from such a long distance that the technique required to convert the chance was extraordinary. The angle was difficult. The timing had to be perfect. The contact had to be clean. It was all three. The shot was, by widespread agreement, the goal of the 2014 World Cup. The technique on the volley, the kind of finish that requires years of practice and the specific instinct to attempt it in an international match, was extraordinary. The Netherlands ultimately won the match 3-2. Australia were eliminated. But Cahill's volley remained, by the end of the tournament, one of the moments that supporters remembered. The Australian forward who had no business attempting a volley like that, and who had executed it perfectly when the moment arrived. 35. Robin van Persie's diving header. Netherlands vs Spain, June 13th, 2014. The 2014 World Cup. Group stage. The Netherlands against Spain. The opening match of Group B in Salvador, Brazil. This was a rematch of the 2010 final. Spain had won that final, denying the Netherlands the trophy. The match in Salvador 4 years later had been billed as the Dutch revenge fixture. Spain led 1-0 at half-time through a Xabi Alonso penalty. The Spanish football was still the football that had won the 2010 World Cup, possession-based, patient-controlling. Then, in the 44th minute, the Dutch winger Daley Blind played a long diagonal pass from the left side of the pitch. The ball travelled some 50 metres through the air toward Robin van Persie, who was running into the Spanish penalty area. Van Persie did not control the ball. He dived. A full-length diving header, body parallel to the ground, arms outstretched, head meeting the ball at the absolute apex of his leap. The ball glanced off his forehead with the exact technique required to give it the trajectory it needed. It went over the Spanish goalkeeper Iker Casillas, who had come off his line to try to claim the ball, and dropped into the back of the net behind him. 1-1. The header was extraordinary in execution. The technique required to time a diving header from a 50-metre cross in a World Cup match, with the goalkeeper coming out, was the work of a forward at the absolute peak of his powers. The Netherlands went on to win the match 5-1. The result was one of the great upsets of the tournament. The defending world champions had been demolished by a team that had been quietly waiting 4 years for the opportunity. Van Persie's header has become one of the most iconic individual goals of the modern World Cup. The diving celebration, Van Persie running back toward the touchline with his arms extended as though he were still flying, became as memorable as the goal itself. 36. James Rodriguez's volley, Colombia versus Uruguay, June 28, 2014. The 2014 World Cup, the round of 16, Colombia against Uruguay, the Maracana, Rio de Janeiro. Colombia had been one of the breakout teams of the tournament. They had won all 3 of their group matches. They had been playing football of attacking flair and technical quality. James Rodriguez, their 22-year-old playmaker, had been the central figure of their run. In the 28th minute, a Colombian throw-in worked the ball to the centre of the pitch. A header was knocked back toward Rodriguez, who was facing the touchline with his back to the Uruguayan goal, some 25 metres out. He took one touch on his chest. He turned. He struck the ball on the volley with his left foot before it touched the ground. The shot, hit with the technique of a long-range volley but with the power of a strike at point-blank range, flew off Rodriguez's boot, hit the underside of the Uruguayan crossbar and dropped into the net. 1-0. Colombia. The goal was, by widespread agreement, the goal of the 2014 World Cup. The technique, the chest control, the turn, the volley, all executed in a single fluid movement that lasted less than 3 seconds, was the work of a player operating at the absolute summit of his abilities. Rodriguez won the Golden Boot at the tournament with 6 goals. He won FIFA's goal of the tournament for the volley against Uruguay. He became, almost overnight, one of the most discussed players in world football. Real Madrid signed him within weeks of the tournament's end for a fee that approached the world record. The goal itself has remained one of the most replayed individual moments in the modern history of the World Cup. A 22-year-old Colombian playmaker producing one of the most technically perfect goals ever scored on the world's biggest stage. 37. Germany 7, Brazil 1, July 8, 2014. The 2014 World Cup semi-final. Brazil against Germany. The Mineirão Belo Horizonte, Brazil's home tournament, the first semi-final since 1950 in Brazil. The opportunity for the country to reach a World Cup final at home for the first time since the Maracanazo. Brazil were without Neymar, injured in the quarter-final against Colombia, and without their captain Thiago Silva, suspended after picking up a yellow card. What followed was, by widespread agreement, the most shocking result in the history of the World Cup. Germany scored after 11 minutes. They scored again in the 23rd minute. And then they scored 4 goals in 6 minutes between the 23rd and 29th minute. Thomas Müller, Miroslav Klose, Toni Kroos, twice. Sami Khedira, 5-0 to Germany, after 29 minutes, in a World Cup semi-final, in Brazil. The Brazilian players were visibly broken. The Mineirão crowd, many of whom had been celebrating the World Cup as a national celebration for years, were in a state of collective shock. Some supporters were weeping. Some had left the stadium. Some were watching in the kind of stunned disbelief that only impossible events produce. Germany scored 2 more goals after half-time. André Schürrle twice. The score was 7-0. Brazil scored a consolation late on through Oscar. The match ended 7-1. The trauma of the result was immediate and lasting. The Brazilian football establishment was overwhelmed by the defeat. The country's footballing identity, built on attacking flair, on the joy of the game, on the certainty that Brazil would always be one of the great forces, had been comprehensively undone in a single 90-minute display by a German team that had played football of clinical efficiency. Germany went on to win the World Cup. They beat Argentina 1-0 in the final. But the match that defined the tournament was Brazil 1 Germany 7. It remains 10 years on, the most shocking result in the history of the competition, the Maracanazo of 2014. Chapter 7. The most recent era. The most recent era of the World Cup runs from Götze's winner in 2014 through to Messi's bisht in 2022. 2 tournaments. A handful of years that have already produced some of the most discussed moments in the competition's modern history. 12 moments from the era. 38. Mario Götze's winning goal. Germany versus Argentina, July 13, 2014. The 2014 World Cup final. Germany against Argentina. The Maracanã, Rio de Janeiro. The match had been tight throughout. Both teams had created chances. Argentina, in particular, had 2 clear opportunities that Gonzalo Higuain had been unable to convert. The match went to extra time at 0-0. In the 113th minute, with the prospect of penalties beginning to look likely, Mario Götze produced one of the most technically perfect World Cup final goals ever scored. Götze was a 22-year-old substitute. He had been brought on by Joachim Löw with the specific brief of producing a moment in extra time that the starting forwards had not been able to produce. He was a player of extraordinary technical ability who had been criticized at times across his career for not converting his talent into the consistent performances that his quality suggested he should be capable of. In the 113th minute he converted it. André Schürrle, on the left wing, played a cross into the Argentine penalty area. The cross was slightly behind Götze, who was running into the area. He met the ball on his chest. The chest control, slightly behind him, with the goalkeeper Sergio Romero coming out, required exact timing to absorb the pace of the cross and bring it down in front of his body. He did it. The ball dropped onto his left foot. He volleyed it across his body into the bottom corner of Argentina's goal. Romero, who had been moving toward Götze, could not reach the shot. 1-0. Germany. The goal, the chest control, the volley, the finish, was a moment of technical brilliance. The kind of goal that 22-year-old substitutes are not supposed to produce in World Cup finals when the entire weight of the match is on the line. Germany held on. The match ended 1-0. Germany were World Cup champions for the 4th time in their history. Götze's goal has been replayed countless times. The technique on the volley remains, in many analyses, one of the finest finishes ever scored in a World Cup final. Argentina went home. Lionel Messi, who had been named the player of the tournament, walked past the trophy on his way to collect his individual award. The image of Messi looking at the trophy he had not won has been discussed elsewhere in the series. 39. Mbappé's hat-trick in the 2022 final. Argentina versus France, December 18th, 2022. The complete context for this has been told in the Argentina 2022 episode of this series, the 2022 World Cup final. Argentina leading 2-0 with 11 minutes to play. Kylian Mbappé scored a penalty in the 81st minute. He scored a volley in the 81st minute. In the space of 97 seconds, Argentina had been pulled level at 2-2. The match went to extra time. Lionel Messi scored to put Argentina 3-2 up. In the 118th minute, Mbappé scored a penalty for France, his 3rd goal of the match. It was the first World Cup final hat-trick since Geoff Hurst in 1966. Hurst's hat-trick had won England the World Cup. Mbappé's did not win France the trophy. Argentina won on penalties. But the individual performance was, by any reasonable measure, the most extraordinary individual display in a World Cup final since Hurst himself. Mbappé was 23 years old, the most dynamic forward in world football, the player who had announced himself at the 2018 World Cup against Argentina in the round of 16, and who had now, 4 years later, scored a hat-trick in the World Cup final against the same opposition. The hat-trick has remained one of the most discussed individual performances in the modern history of the tournament. The combination of the moment, Argentina being 2-0 up, the World Cup seemingly secured, and the response, the individual brilliance from Mbappé that single-handedly dragged France back into the match, made it the kind of performance that the tournament occasionally produces from its very best players. It also confirmed Mbappé's position as the player who would define the next decade of the World Cup. He was 23. He had 2 World Cup finals already, with a winner's medal and a hat-trick. His career, even at that point, was building toward a place in the conversation about the greatest players the tournament has ever produced. 40. Saudi Arabia beating Argentina. November 22nd, 2022. The opening match of Argentina's 2022 World Cup campaign. Argentina against Saudi Arabia. The Lusail Stadium, Qatar. Argentina were the second-ranked team in the world. They were on a 36-match unbeaten run. They were one of the favourites for the entire tournament, with Lionel Messi at the centre of everything. Saudi Arabia were ranked 51st. They were among the lowest-rated teams in the competition. The match was supposed to be a formality. Argentina led 1-0 at half-time through a Messi penalty. They had 3 more goals ruled out for offside, including efforts by the narrowest of margins under the new semi-automated offside technology. In the second half, Saudi Arabia scored twice in 5 minutes. Saleh Al-Shairi in the 48th minute. Salem Al-Dawsari in the 53rd minute with a finish of such pace and precision that the goalkeeper Emiliano Martinez had no chance. 2-1, Saudi Arabia. The shock was immediate. Argentina pressed for an equaliser across the remaining 30-plus minutes. The Saudi defence, organised, committed, throwing themselves in front of every shot, held. The match ended 2-1. The result became one of the great upsets of the 2022 tournament. The defeat of one of the favourites by a team that had been expected to lose comfortably. It also, in retrospect, became part of the foundation of Argentina's tournament. The disaster that forged the team that would, 5 weeks later, become world champions. The narrative parallel to the Spain 2010 Switzerland defeat, and to many other tournaments where the eventual winners had to recover from an opening match shock. But in the immediate aftermath, the result was simply a stunning upset. Saudi Arabia had beaten the favourites. The football world had its first major shock of the tournament. 41. The Croatia 2018 run and Modric, Russia 2018. The 2018 World Cup belonged, in many ways, to Croatia, a country of just 4 million people, reaching their first World Cup final. The smallest nation by population to reach the final since the tournament's earliest decades. The central figure of the run was Luka Modric. Modric was 32 years old at the 2018 World Cup, the Real Madrid midfielder. A player who had been one of the finest controlling midfielders in European football for years, but whose international career had often been overshadowed by Croatia's failure to make deep tournament runs. The 2018 tournament was different. Croatia won all 3 of their group matches. They beat Denmark on penalties in the round of 16. They beat hosts Russia on penalties in the quarter-final. They beat England in extra time in the semi-final. 3 consecutive knockout matches taken to extra time. Croatia, with their relatively small squad, having to play the equivalent of additional matches across the knockout rounds. The physical and mental demand on the squad was enormous. Modric was the heartbeat of the team, the player who covered ground in midfield, who organised the possession game, who produced the moments of individual quality at the moments they were needed. His semi-final against England, a midfield masterclass in a 2-1 extra time win, was, by widespread agreement, one of the most complete individual performances in a tournament knockout match in years. Croatia lost the final to France 4-2, but Modric was named the player of the tournament. The Golden Ball. The recognition of an individual performance that had carried his country further than any reasonable forecast had suggested possible. The image of Modric receiving the Golden Ball in the pouring rain at the Luzhniki Stadium, and the larger image of the Croatia 2018 run, has remained one of the most resonant moments of recent World Cup history. A nation of 4 million people, a 32-year-old midfielder at the absolute peak of his powers. The proof that smaller footballing nations could, in the right circumstances, compete at the very highest level. 42. France 4, Argentina 3, June 30th, 2018. The 2018 World Cup. The round of 16. France against Argentina. Kazan, Russia. The match has been described in this series before, in the Argentina 2022 episode, as one of the great knockout matches in modern World Cup history. The 4-3 scoreline, the end-to-end football. The combination of both teams unable to defend properly and both teams capable of attacking brilliance. But the moment that defines the match, and the moment that defines the 2018 World Cup, was Kylian Mbappé. Mbappé was 19 years old. He had been a substitute in France's group stage matches. The round of 16 was his breakout match. He scored twice. He was fouled to win a penalty that gave France their second goal. He produced a run against the Argentine defence that became one of the iconic individual moments of the tournament. Sprinting from his own half, beating defenders by sheer pace, drawing a foul deep in the Argentine penalty area. The pace itself was extraordinary. The kind of pace that defines a generation of forwards. Mbappé was visibly quicker than every Argentine defender he faced. The acceleration from standing, the maintenance of full pace over long distances, the change of direction at speed, all of it was operating at a level that the World Cup had not seen since the early Ronaldo years. France won the match 4-3. They went on to win the World Cup, beating Croatia in the final. Mbappé won the FIFA Young Player Award. He became the first teenager to score in a World Cup final since Pelé in 1958. He was, after the tournament, the most discussed young footballer in the world. The match against Argentina was the moment that announced him. The image of a 19-year-old French forward running past an Argentine defence that included Lionel Messi has remained, 4 years on, one of the defining individual moments of the 2018 World Cup. 43. The Morocco 20. 22 run. Qatar, 2022. The 2022 World Cup produced one of the great fairy tale tournament runs in recent memory. Morocco, ranked 22nd in the world going in, became the first African nation in history to reach the semi-finals of a World Cup. The route was extraordinary. They topped their group ahead of Belgium and Croatia. They beat Spain in the round of 16 on penalties. After a 0-0 draw, with Yacine Bonu saving multiple Spanish efforts in the shootout. They beat Portugal in the quarter-final 1-0, with Cristiano Ronaldo coming off the bench but unable to find the equaliser. They lost the semi-final to France 2-0, but the third-place playoff against Croatia, where they lost 2-1, did not diminish what they had achieved. They had become the first African nation to reach the last four of the World Cup, the first Arab nation to do so. The team had carried the hopes not just of Morocco, but of an entire continent across the tournament. The atmosphere created by the Moroccan supporters, many of whom had travelled from across the Arab world, many of whom were Moroccan immigrants and their descendants living in Europe, became one of the defining features of the 2022 tournament. The flag of Morocco was visible across Qatar in numbers that no pre-tournament forecast had predicted. The Moroccan players themselves, Hakim Ziyech, Achraf Hakimi, Sofiane Amrabat, Yacine Bounou, the captain Romain Saïss, became, across the tournament, household names across the football world. The combination of technical quality, defensive organisation, and the energy of being the underdog produced football that the entire world watched. The Morocco 2022 run remains, 2 years later, one of the most resonant tournament runs of recent decades, a reminder that the World Cup at its best can produce stories that no other competition can produce. The semi-final defeat to France was disappointing in the immediate moment, but the achievement of reaching the semi-final, and of doing so as the first African nation to ever do it, has only grown in significance with the passage of time. 44. Messi's goal versus Mexico, November 26th, 2022. The complete context for this goal has been told in the Argentina 2022 episode of this series. The 64th minute of Argentina's second group stage match against Mexico. The match Argentina absolutely had to win after the Saudi Arabia disaster. The Lusail Stadium, Qatar. The 64th minute. Argentina had been struggling. Mexico had been organised. The match had been tight and goalless. A loose ball came to Messi 25 metres out. He took a touch to control. He struck the ball low and hard into the bottom corner. 1-0. Argentina. The goal kept the campaign alive. It was, in retrospect, one of the most important goals of the tournament. The release of tension across Argentina was visible in real time. The campaign that had seemed to be on the verge of collapse had been saved. Messi's celebration was specific. The kind of celebration of a player who understood exactly what the goal meant. The kind of celebration of a captain whose team had been staring at elimination and who had, with a single strike, given them the breathing room to recover. It was the goal that began Argentina's run to the World Cup. 45. Messi's dribble past Gvardiol, December 13th, 2022. The Argentina 2022 semi-final against Croatia. The Lusail Stadium, Qatar. The 69th minute. Argentina were 2-0 up. Joško Gvardiol, the brilliant young Croatian defender, one of the most highly rated centre-backs in world football, was marking Messi on the right side of the pitch. What followed was, by widespread agreement, the finest individual moment Messi produced in his entire 2022 tournament. He went at Gvardiol. He drove down the wing toward the byline. Gvardiol, quick, strong, an elite defender, stayed with him. And Messi turned him, stopped, started, shifted the ball with his feet faster than Gvardiol's body could turn. The defender, who had been one of the best young centre-backs in the world coming into the tournament, was reduced to falling and recovering and falling again as Messi worked the ball along the touchline. Messi reached the byline. He pulled the ball back across the face of goal for Julian Alvarez to tap in. 3-0. Argentina. The dribble, the duel against Guardiola specifically, became one of the most replayed individual moments of the entire tournament. The combination of Messi's age, 35, the physical capability still present at that age, and the contrast with one of the most highly rated young defenders in world football, made the moment significant in a way that pure goal scoring could not have been. The goal was finished by Alvarez, but it was Messi's. The run, the dribble, the dismantling. At 35, in a World Cup semi-final, against a player marked as the next generation of elite defending, was a statement. It remains one of the most extraordinary individual moments of Messi's career, of the 2022 tournament, and of the modern history of the World Cup. 46. Martinez's penalty. Heroics versus Netherlands. December 9th, 2022. The Argentina 2022 quarter-final against the Netherlands. The Lusail Stadium, Qatar. The match has been described in detail in the Argentina 2022 episode. The 2-0 lead. The 2-2 equaliser late in normal time. The chaos. The extra time. The penalty shootout. In the penalty shootout, Emiliano Martinez became the figure who defined Argentina's tournament. The 30-year-old Argentine goalkeeper had spent years on the fringes at Arsenal before becoming a senior player at Aston Villa in his late 20s. He had become Argentina's first-choice goalkeeper in his 30s. By the 2022 World Cup, he had developed into one of the finest goalkeepers in the world, with a specific reputation for excellence in penalty shootouts. He saved 2 Dutch penalties. Van Dijk, the Dutch captain, the best defender in the world at the time, saw his penalty saved by Martinez, who had been talking to him as he placed the ball, had been delaying, had been using every available means of disruption to break the goalkeeper's concentration. The save was hard, low to his right. He pushed it away. Then Steven Berghuis stepped up. Martinez moved early. He saved that one too. The dam broke. The Netherlands were on the back foot. Argentina won the shootout. Martinez's celebrations were specific. He sprinted toward the Argentine end of the stadium holding his gloves in his hand, screaming with his face contorted with effort. The goalkeeper who had spent years as a backup at Arsenal had become, in the moment of saving 2 Dutch penalties in a World Cup quarter-final, one of the central figures of his country's tournament. His penalty heroics continued through the rest of the tournament. He saved a Coman penalty in the final shootout against France. He developed, across the tournament, a reputation as the most theatrical and effective penalty shootout goalkeeper in modern football. The Martinez of 2022 became the goalkeeper who, in Argentine football folklore, will be remembered as the man who carried his country through penalty shootouts to the World Cup trophy. 47. Montiel's winning penalty. December 18th, 2022. The penalty shootout of the 2022 World Cup final. The complete context has been told in the Argentina 2022 episode. The 3-3 draw after extra time. Mbappe's hat-trick. The shootout that came down to single kicks. Martinez saved Coman's penalty. Tchouaméni missed. Argentina were ahead. Dybala scored. Kolo Muani scored to keep France alive. And it came down to Gonzalo Montiel. Montiel was 25 years old. A defender. The player who had given away the penalty that allowed Mbappe to complete his hat-trick. He stepped up carrying the specific weight of a player who had been the cause of his team's near defeat, and now had the chance to be the cause of their victory. He took 3 steps back. He ran up, He struck it. The ball went into the bottom right corner. The French goalkeeper, Hugo Lloris, dived in the right direction, but could not reach it. Argentina were World Cup champions. The 36-year wait was over. Lionel Messi had won the trophy that had defined and tormented his entire career. The team that had recovered from the Saudi Arabia disaster had become world champions through the maximum possible difficulty. Montiel's penalty, one specific kick from one specific player at one specific moment, was the trigger for everything that followed. The image of Argentina's celebrations, the bisht, the trophy, the homecoming parade in Buenos Aires must come. All of it traces directly back to Montiel's kick crossing the line. 48. Messi lifting. The trophy in the bisht. December 18th, 2022. The image that completed Lionel Messi's career. The trophy presentation on the pitch at the Lusail Stadium. The Emir of Qatar placing a bisht, the traditional black and gold Arab robe, over Messi's shoulders before he lifted the trophy. The gesture was one of the highest honours in Arab culture. It was also a slightly unusual moment in the trophy presentation traditions of football, and produced some debate at the time. But the image itself transcended any debate. Messi raising the World Cup above his head, the gold of the trophy, the gold trim of the robe, the lights of the stadium, the Argentine players around him celebrating. He kissed it. He lifted it. He held it up to the Argentine supporters. The cameras stayed on him for a long time. It was the completion of 16 years of trying, of 4 lost finals, of the tears of 2016, of the retirement that had lasted weeks, of the long wait that had defined the most scrutinized career in football history. The trophy was finally his. The image of Messi lifting the World Cup in the bisht has become, in the years since, one of the most reproduced photographs in the entire history of sport. Not just football. Sport. The picture has become a reference point in conversations about athletic achievement and individual completion. It captures, in a single frame, what it means to want something for 16 years and finally receive it. "49. The Argentine celebrations. Buenos Aires, December 2022. The aftermath of the 2022 World Cup. The Argentine team returning home to Buenos Aires. The celebrations that followed were, by widespread agreement, the largest in the history of any country celebrating any sporting achievement. Estimates of the crowd that turned out for the homecoming parade range from 4 to 5 million people. The team's open-top bus was unable to move through the streets. The supporters had filled every available inch of Buenos Aires. The players were eventually evacuated by helicopter from the parade because the bus could not progress. The image of the Argentine players from the helicopter looking down at the sea of people in the streets became one of the most striking images of the aftermath of the tournament. A scale of celebration that was almost difficult to comprehend. The celebrations continued for days. Argentina, a country that had been through difficult economic and political years, allowed itself a sustained moment of collective joy that transcended the day-to-day difficulties of life. The football team had given the country something that no economic recovery could provide, a reason to celebrate together as a single nation in the streets for days. It was the final image of the 2022 tournament, and one of the most powerful demonstrations of what the World Cup, at its best, can mean to the people who follow the teams that participate in it. Chapter 8. The eternal moment. There is one moment left, the 50th moment. Across the previous chapters, we have moved through nearly a century of the World Cup. From Lucien Laurent's first goal in 1930 to Messi lifting the trophy in 2022. Through Pelé and Garrincha and Cruyff. Through Maradona's tournament and the heartbreak of 1994. Through the most beautiful football and the most shocking results. Through joy and grief and the full range of what the tournament has produced. The final moment is not a goal. It is not a save. It is not a celebration. It is not a single instant of athletic brilliance that can be reduced to a photograph or a piece of footage. The final moment is everything that came before it. 50. The dream. Jules Rimet's vision realized. When Jules Rimet first proposed the idea of a World Cup in the early 1920s, he was widely considered to be slightly eccentric. A French lawyer and football administrator who had become president of FIFA in 1921. A man who believed that football, the sport that had spread across Europe and South America in the previous decades, that had captured the imagination of working-class supporters across multiple continents, deserved a tournament that brought together the best of every nation. The idea was not, at the time, obvious. The Olympic Games had been the dominant international sporting event. They included football, but only for amateur players. The professional game was developing rapidly at the club level. Leagues across Europe and South America were beginning to organize themselves into the structures that would define the sport for the next century. But there was no equivalent at the international level. Rimet believed there should be one. He worked across the 1920s to convince his fellow FIFA officials that a World Cup was a viable concept. The objections were significant. The Olympic Games covered football. The financial risks were enormous. The travel demands of a global tournament in an era before commercial aviation were almost prohibitive. The political difficulties of organizing a competition that would require cooperation between nations whose relationships were often tense were significant. Rimet pushed through all of them. The first World Cup, held in Uruguay in 1930, almost did not happen. Most of Europe declined to attend. The travel was prohibitive. The political tensions were difficult. The Uruguayan organizers had to commit significant resources to making the tournament possible. It happened anyway. And what Rimet imagined when he first proposed the World Cup, a global tournament that would bring together the best of every nation, that would produce moments that the entire world would watch and remember, that would create a shared sporting language across continents, became, across the decades that followed, the most successful realization of a single sporting vision in the history of human civilization. The World Cup that Rimet imagined was small, modest. The first tournament had 13 teams. The total attendance across the entire competition was approximately 590,000 people. The matches were broadcast by radio to the participating nations. There was no global television coverage. There was no commercial sponsorship. There was no merchandising. The World Cup that exists today is something Rimet could not have imagined. The 2022 tournament had 32 teams. The final was watched by approximately 1.5 billion people, the largest single sporting audience in human history. The total cumulative audience across the tournament was estimated at around 5 billion, more than half the population of the planet. The commercial revenue from the tournament exceeded $7 billion. What had started as a small football competition in Uruguay in 1930 had become, by 2022, the largest shared cultural event that humanity has ever organized. But the scale is not the point. The point, the thing that makes the World Cup what it is, that gives every individual moment we have discussed in this video its particular meaning, is what the tournament has come to represent. Every 4 years the entire world stops. Roughly half the human population watches the same matches at the same time. Not because they have been told to, not because anyone has organized them to, because they have collectively decided, over the course of nearly a century, that this tournament matters. That the football played at this specific competition every 4 years deserves the kind of attention that no other sporting event receives. The reason it matters is that the World Cup is the only sporting event in which every participant represents not a club, but a country. Not a contract, but a culture. Not a chosen team, but a national identity that is, in some indefinable but deeply felt way, part of who the participants are. For 90 minutes, stretched across 3 weeks of a summer tournament, that identity is at stake, in a way that nothing else makes it. And the moments that we have discussed in this video, all 50 of them, are the moments when that identity was tested, expressed, or transformed. The first goal in 1930. The Maracanazo in 1950. Pelé at 17. Banks's save. The goal of the century. The chip over Seaman. The volley over the Spanish goalkeeper. The bisht. All of it. Every moment a small piece of what the World Cup is. Every moment shared by hundreds of millions of people at the time it happened. Every moment, decades later, still capable of producing the same emotion in the people who first witnessed it. This is what Jules Rimet imagined. Or rather, this is what Jules Rimet's idea became, beyond anything he could have specifically imagined when he first proposed it. A global cultural event that produces moments that transcend their immediate context, that become part of the shared language of millions of people who do not otherwise share any common ground, that give entire nations reason to celebrate, to mourn, to talk to each other, to remember. The 50 moments we have told in this video are 50 of those moments. There are thousands more. Every World Cup produces hundreds of moments that, for the people who watch them, become permanent fixtures in the way they remember their own lives. Where they were when a goal was scored, who they were with, what they were doing in the years before and after the tournament. The World Cup is in this sense more than a tournament. It is more than a sporting event. It is a shared global memory, updated every 4 years, added to by every generation of players, supporters and observers. Jules Rimet died in 1956. He did not live to see the World Cup become what it eventually became. He saw it through 6 tournaments, 1930, 1934, 1938, 1950, 1954, and the year before he died, the build-up to 1958. The tournament that bears his name, the original trophy, the Jules Rimet Trophy, was awarded permanently to Brazil after their 1970 victory and was subsequently stolen and never recovered, has become, in the decades since his death, exactly the thing he imagined it could be. Bigger than him, bigger than any single person who organized it, bigger than any nation that hosted it, bigger than any player who won it, the shared global memory. The dream realized, the eternal moment made permanent. Epilogue. The game, whispered. So those are the 50 greatest moments the World Cup has produced. 50 from a competition that has produced thousands. 50 specific instants from nearly a century of football. The first goal in 1930, and the most recent triumph in 2022. And everything in between. We chose 50, not because there are exactly 50 moments worth remembering, but because 50 is a number that allows us to move across the eras of the tournament without losing the rhythm, without rushing past the moments that deserve room, without padding the moments that need to be brief. There are others. Of course there are others. There is Carlos Alberto's goal in 1970, which received its own moment but could have produced a chapter of its own. There is Diego Forlan's tournament in 2010. There is Saud Abdulhamid's volley against Mexico in 1994. There is Saeed Alawairan's run against Belgium in the same tournament. There is Andres Escobar's own goal in 1994 and the tragedy that followed. There are dozens of penalty shootouts, hundreds of individual moments of brilliance from players whose names did not make this list, but whose contributions to the tournament have been part of its mythology nonetheless. The selection was not exhaustive. It was illustrative. 50 moments that, taken together, give some sense of what the World Cup has been across the nearly 100 years of its existence. Not the full picture, but a picture. The moments we chose were the moments that have, in the years and decades since they occurred, refused to fade. This is one of the specific features of the World Cup. The moments produced by the tournament do not lose their power with the passage of time. They become more powerful. They acquire weight. They become reference points. Maradona's goal against England in 1986 is more meaningful now, almost 4 decades later, than it was on the day it was scored. Banks's save from Pelé in 1970 has accumulated additional significance with every great save that has subsequently been compared to it. The Maracanazo in 1950 has grown in cultural weight across the 75 years since it occurred, until it has become something close to a Brazilian national wound. A moment so painful that the country built a stadium specifically to host the 2014 tournament that would, in the popular imagination, finally exorcise it. The 7-1 against Germany was that exorcism failing. The moments compound. Each new tournament adds new moments that will decades later be discussed alongside the ones we have just told. The next World Cup will produce its own. They will be remembered. They will become part of the same shared archive. In 100 years, when people are telling the stories of the World Cup, the moments that we have just discussed will still be discussed. They will have new contexts, new comparisons, new significance, but they will still be there. This was the 4th episode in our series. The first 3 were narrative: Argentina 2022, Spain 2010, Brazil 2002. Complete stories of specific tournament wins. Each one a sustained focus on a single team and a single triumph. This episode was different. A gallery rather than a story. 50 moments drawn from the full sweep of the tournament's history. Both formats work. Both are part of what we are building. The series will continue with other narrative episodes, the other World Cup winners told one by one, and other thematic episodes like this one. What ties them together is the format. Long form. Calm. Designed to drift alongside you in the calm and the quiet as you fall asleep. The football told slowly. The game whispered. For now, we leave it here. 50 moments. From the first goal in Montevideo to the bisht in Qatar. From Jules Rimet's vision to Lionel Messi's completion of the story that took the longest to complete. If you have been listening from the beginning, thank you. If you have drifted in and out, that is what the format is for. If you fell asleep at moment 17 and never quite made it to the end, also fine. The video will still be here tomorrow. You can return to it whenever you want. The World Cup is, in the end, about its moments. The goals and the saves and the celebrations, the shocks and the triumphs and the heartbreaks, the individual instants that, taken together, form the most extraordinary shared archive in the history of sport. 50 of them, told in the dark, for you. Thank you for listening. Rest now. The next episode will be here when you are ready. Good night.